Good evening. Welcome to our third webinar titled Financial Education in High School, Getting Deaf Youth Ready for College and the World. First, I'd like to make sure that all our participants have updated their Zoom application. If so, you should see 4 people, myself, 2 interpreters, as well as Michael Higgins. If you do not see 4 individuals on the screen, 4 separate screens, click gallery view or speaker view and it should switch into that. If not, reach out to our tech support through the chat box. Now, in regards to who we are, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I am Joseph Santini, and I am the Director of Instruction for the Laurent Claire National Deaf Education Center. And tonight we have Michael Higgins. Mike, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yes, hello. My name is Michael, and I am currently a teacher for math and personal finance at MSSD. I'm really excited to be here tonight. Thank you for having me. I look forward to sharing information with this group.
Yes, well, thanks for being here with us tonight. We both are out working in education all day long, so we appreciate you folks being here with us tonight. We also would like to thank the team at CSD Learns for supporting us behind the scenes tonight. A big cheers to them and thanks for their time as well. It's critical that we recognize our sponsors as well. This series would not be possible without support from CSD Learns. CSD Learns is an educational portion of communication service for the deaf. And we also want to thank Hands-On Banking. They are an educational online program put together by Wells Fargo. So thanks to both of them for making tonight possible. Now, the reason for a webinar financial education series is to address needs throughout the country for financial literacy, and also to help improve the economic picture for deaf and hard of hearing people, to support teachers, administrators, parents, social workers, and deaf youth, and create a space to learn from one another's experiences and exchange the best practices for establishing uh, the students' financial foundations. So thank you for joining us tonight. Now, again, specifically the points we want to cover tonight. So the goal for our session is to cover some of the challenges that high school teachers and parents face when teaching financial literacy to the deaf youth in their households or schools, and also to bring the knowledge of experts to the deaf community, and to give participants a chance to get the answers to their burning questions. And finally, we also want to share some financial resources with the attendees here, and materials and tools for you to be able to use and apply. So we're looking forward to tonight because we do have a lot to discuss. Without much more ado, we will get going. I do see that we have 13 people here tonight. We'd like to welcome everyone, and we'll start with discussing some financial literacy statistics. First, it's a fact. Many people are unaware, and many deaf Americans themselves are unaware as to how to buy a house, investing, how to save for the children's future college plans, how to pay off their debt because of bills and lack of financial planning.
And really, it all starts at a young age. Uh, your habits that you develop according to your finances are usually established at 7, and they'll stay with you lifelong.
That's really young. So with the financial literacy course, this would educate our deaf youth about budgeting, savings, investing, and protecting your money. These are the critical, essential portions of financial planning.
You're so right. Taking that class will build a foundation for one's future to be successful and to have budgeting skills, and also to avoid mistakes that can end up being costly and lead to a real struggle in life.
Agreed. And one of the reasons we're hosting this webinar tonight is because throughout the country, only 16.9% of high school students are required to take any type of financial literacy courses before graduating. Think of that, 16.9%, such a low number. And first, we'd like to see who's here joining us tonight. We're curious to see if we have all parents, maybe some deaf youth. Wow, look at those numbers. We've got 64% of teachers with us tonight. And moving on, we can see social workers and parents kind of even out there at 18%. And we have a person posting saying that they are also an interpreter in education. And the interpreter is not able to see, there's a screen. So we appreciate those folks here tonight.
Yeah, thank you all for joining.
Okay, now I'm going to ask for control of the presentation again. This is Joseph speaking. We'll go ahead and continue with our first discussion question for tonight. I want to explain our format. As we have our conversation tonight, we will give the audience an opportunity to ask us questions. So if you have questions to ask, go ahead and type those into the Q&A box as we move along. Thank you. First discussion question for tonight. Again, with high school financial literacy, what are the most important objectives of a high school financial education curriculum? Michael, what are your thoughts on that question?
You know, that's a really good question to start with. It's a nice, broad question. I'd say the most important thing to keep in mind is that everyone has different financial goals in their lives. Some people want a big house with a lot of cars. Others want to be able to travel around the world and go on trips. Some people want to own a boat. There's really no wrong answer in terms of financial planning. So, a good curriculum should be able to support everyone being able to meet their unique goal. And typically, there are four main parts. The first is how to budget your money, how to balance, the income that you get from work or other places, and how to budget that to stay in the black, to never go in the red.
Mm,
Once you make your budget and you actually have an excess above your expenses, you then decide what you want to do with that money. Put it under your pillow. That's the second step, is to decide where you're going to put your money. That includes investments.
I see
You want your
investment.
money to work for you and grow. So once you have some excess money, banks will start to lend you money against your assets that you have. So that's the next thing that we learn about, is how to take out a loan, how to purchase a car for college, for a mortgage for your house. The most important thing is learning how to protect your money from risk. And that's where insurance comes into the picture. Auto insurance, things like that, a good curriculum should cover, because all of those facets apply to anyone and everyone, no matter where they are in life.
Yikes, this is a lot of content. I'm curious, Michael, how long have you been teaching financial literacy?
Well, this is my second year teaching the class at MSSD. Prior to that, I was in the financial industry for 6 years.
Hmm,
And my graduate thesis was on teaching deaf youth financial literacy.
nice.
So I bring a lot of experience to the table. And I really feel inspired giving back to the next generation and passing that information that's really hard to get.
Really nice. I really appreciate having you here with us tonight, sharing your thoughts, Michael. I see there's already some questions coming in or comments coming in from our audience. Let's take a look at see what people are saying. First comment from Mary Matchett says, as a higher education administrator, I do feel that it's important for high school students to have a knowledge about finances, saving, risk, credit, FAFSA. That's a good tip to put out there, FAFSA. Wow. So we will be talking more about these subjects tonight. So she says it would be great if everyone had an opportunity at school to simulate a bank situation so they can spend some money, have a statement, maybe do that for school supplies or through a team or with a budget instructor. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yes.
Yeah, I have to agree that hands-on experience is often the best way to learn something. And working with a budget in school, in an organization, having that hands-on experience will make sure that it sticks, that knowledge sticks for life.
Fantastic. There's another comment there from Jeremiah Thompson that says important information about the value of money, budgeting, investing, and how debt in general works should be a goal. And I think I do agree with that. Additional question from a private commenter says, will we be provided transcripts of the program tonight? From my understanding, the answer to that is that there is a recording of tonight's program, tonight's webinar, and it will be posted after the webinar is finished. So yes, we do look forward, you can look forward to having more resources shared with you. Excuse me, interpreter, it's tongue-tied. Okay, so that ends our first discussion question, which moves us along to our second discussion question. And Michael, what are the challenges in developing a financial education curriculum specifically designed for deaf high school students?
You know, first off, when I was thinking of a curriculum, there's so many curriculums out there, and I could take any of them and use them in my classroom. But most of the curriculums out there really are built for hearing students in public schools. So I have to do some modifications to make sure that the curriculum that I'm teaching really meets the needs of our deaf students. The first thing I think of are the specific things that the deaf community really values and things that are really important deaf students to know about money. Like one such thing is that deaf students can receive a discount for public transportation or riding the subway. Also, learning how voc rehab works, Social Security, SSDI, SSI, that type of information you won't find in the more general mainstream curriculum, but it's very important for deaf students to learn that for their future. So we'll include some other pieces of knowledge into the curriculum that applies. It makes me think of the old joke. It's a deaf barber joke where a barber decides to give deaf people free haircuts for the day. They close up shop, next day open their doors and see a huge line of deaf people out the door because deaf people share knowledge when it comes to financial information, and they share where the deals are, where the deals can be found. And oftentimes they don't get that information at home, so it's very important for that information to be provided and supported in school.
I agree completely, Michael. I need to interrupt you and ask you to hold on. I see that there is some issues going on with our participants tonight. We have several people saying they can't see me, myself, the speaker. So if you are having a tough time with the video screens showing, if you'll look at the upper right-hand corner, it should say speaker view or gallery view. Click on that button, it'll toggle between the views, and you should be able to see us all. Now, Michael, do you mind covering those three things again that we don't typically see in education curriculum, financial education curriculum for deaf youth? You said SSI was one. What is the other?
Right. How to save money every day, and spending for public transportation and
Right,
making use of the discount.
there was one
Uh,
more.
the third
The
thing,
voc rehab, vocational
yes,
rehab.
right. And also something that has come up more recently is called ABLE accounting. It went into the law several years ago, and there's not a lot of awareness in terms of how that works. It's accounting specific for people with disabilities. And so it's another way to save and invest without taxes. And so I include that within my curriculum because it's very beneficial for my students to have that knowledge.
Right. Do we have information? No, we do have information about ABLE in our resources page, right? So if those viewers here or those participants here are interested in that, you'll be able to click on that later tonight. Now, we might have some questions coming from the audience in regards to that. What challenges in developing financial education or financial literacy curriculum is there when creating that curriculum specifically for deaf high school students? Before we move on to our next question, we do have a poll question. We're curious, does your child or does your children's school teach budgeting, business, investment, banking, some of the above, all of the above, none? If so, go ahead and answer our poll question, which should be popping up on your screen now. While you vote, I'll go ahead and comment. We got a comment from Michael Kane. Michael says, wow, it's critical teaching deaf students to emphasize credit and credit reports and the impact those have on a financial future. Uh, there is a negative experience that people often have with credit card debt, and that can impact your borrowing ability in the future for vehicles or anything else. So it's important to learn about that. Do you agree, Michael?
I completely agree. And in today's world, identity theft happens so easily. People can swipe your social security number and then open up accounts in your name, and that can truly hurt your financial health. So it's important to teach our students how to be careful with their personal information, like their social security number. Yes, that's crucial.
Definitely. Young people sometimes don't realize how safe they have to keep their information online. And so let's see the results of the poll. I'm really curious. Interesting. The results show 27% only teach banking. What a low number. We need to get that number up higher. Business coming in at 9%. Some of the respondents. Business, again, a very low number at 9%. Budgeting comes in a little better. High schools out there are teaching at it, at least in this survey, at 45%. So all of the above come in at 27%. And then we have 18% of none of the above. Fascinating numbers. So we'll move on with our discussion question number 3. I'm curious, what lessons, activities, or units should teachers incorporate to help students develop a solid understanding of financial literacy? Michael, I'm curious.
Yeah, there's a lot of great resources out there related to finances. Um, but most of those are in English, which is not our
Right.
students' first language. So that's a huge challenge for teachers to make sure that they're providing information in a way that's accessible, that's sign language, or helping students learn how to read and interpret that information, that text, and apply it to their own life. Something I use a lot in the classroom is CSD's personal finance series videos that they've
Oh,
created
yes.
on this topic. Oh, yeah, I use them a lot in my teaching. They are truly helpful, as well as Kramer Finance. They have some videos as well that are geared more towards older students, but they have one in particular on credit that I really use a lot in the classroom with my students.
That's excellent, Michael.
The most important thing is to keep your students engaged and to give them real life scenarios, examples where they can make decisions and learn how to defend those decisions in front of their peers.
Right.
English may be a barrier, but if you use mixed groups, um, maybe have different levels of literacy, people with different levels of literacy within the same group, they can work together and overcome that barrier.
Sure.
I'm sure everyone does this, but it's also a good idea to look for a community member who can come in and share their personal story as
Hmm.
far as how they work with money personally. Lucky for me, I live in DC, so there's wonderful deaf professionals in the financial arena, and I've asked them to come in. Deaf Tax is one. They run Charles Sterling, someone from Charles Sterling comes every year, and they talk about taxes and how to fill out your tax forms. Also, Merrill Lynch, someone from Merrill Lynch comes as well. Uh, I, I want to make sure that my students get a well-rounded experience.
That sounds great, Michael. I think it's critical to see real world stories because we can, as humans, learn from each other. And so for the students to see that and learn from them. And like you mentioned, that haircut joke, great joke. That information spreads like wildfire. So we want to see if there's any comments in regards to the discussion question. If there are, go ahead and share with us. I'm looking in the box and it seems there's something there. Michael, I'm curious. You mentioned you show a video in your class. What was the name of that video?
Yes, it's actually on YouTube. It's a YouTube channel that I frequent. There's actually two that I frequent. One is made by CSD, and I believe the name of the channel is CSD Financial Literacy.
I believe
And
it
you'll
is.
see it, yeah, later in our resources slide, I included the link. So you'll find both of them, CSD and Kramer, there in the resources page.
And I want to add a resource that I've seen used a lot with adults, not so much with the youth, is the IRS.
IRS.
They make several videos about taxes and how that process is, and they film those in American Sign Language. So it's nice to see a growth in American Sign Language resources for our students. Having that direct native language communication is quite impactful on our community.
Most definitely.
Yep. Next discussion question, number 4. So, what extracurricular or out of school activities can students engage in to help them develop financial literacy? I'm curious, Michael, what are your thoughts on that question?
Well, one of our guests that I uh, talked about earlier, they speak about the value of having experience in the school environment in regards to budgeting. That's a
Uh,
great way. You know, a lot of schools have student government, student organizations, and you have class of 2020 organizations, and
right.
there's always a chance to practice budgeting, figure out where the money can be spent and how the money can come in with fundraisers. So that real hands-on experience they can learn and apply to their personal finance as well. Another thing I always encourage students to do is to look for part-time jobs.
So true.
I feel like that truly will help them understand the value of money,
Hmm.
and kind of understand that money does not grow on trees like my young children still think. They think money grows on trees still. And when you earn money, it teaches you the value of it and will help you be more careful with spending as well. I remember having a talk with you
Right.
about, before I make any big purchase, I always think about how many hours I had to work to purchase that amount, that value of what I want to buy. So
Uh-huh.
that's a good experience for our younger students to have.
It is. I think it's important for young people to develop that sense of the value of money and what that is. Uh, we work and our work has value and that translates into money. So I'm curious for our audience members, what do you think? What activities should students participate in and what would help them develop financial literacy? Let's see if we have a comment there. There is a comment from Bonnie Wallace. Good question. She asked, what tips do you have to encourage students to become involved in this topic? Because many of them don't even think it's important or fun. I'm curious your thoughts on this, Michael.
One curriculum I use in particular in my classroom is called NGPF. It's Next Gen Personal Finance. And that curriculum, I think, does a very nice job. One thing they have a lot of is simulations. They
I
have a
see.
lot of online games, so to speak, where you take on the role of somebody, you role play, and then you're asked to make some decisions within a scenario. One is where you can become an Uber driver and you're
Wow.
faced with choices throughout your day. You have to make decisions that will either make you money or cost you money.
Uh-huh.
So that's a good way to get students engaged by giving them a game to play. You make it fun with some pointers that they can take away at the end. They'll learn if they're in the red or in the black at the end of the game.
Right.
Also, if they make an expense or a bad financial decision in real life, that can be very costly. So allowing them to make these mistakes within the simulation, there's no harm. and it won't cost them any real money, but they'll still learn from the experience. It's also something that they'll take with them into the future and remember how those decisions will impact them.
Right. Even myself, as director of instruction, I often encourage students, especially those at the upper end, seniors and juniors in high school, to go ahead and visit the financial support office. Quite often, there's a lot of tips available there on how to prepare for college. And students can begin thinking and knowing how much college is actually going to cost, right? I think we as educators need to motivate and encourage students to go out in the real world and get that information for themselves. And also, I really like gaming. I like gamifying uh, in
Monopoly.
instruction. Like, for example, the game Monopoly. I was, for me, a fantastic game growing up. I used to fight with my sister over that game sometimes. I mean, even board games can be fun. Do you think that's possible?
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And Monopoly is a great game because in it you learn how to budget your money. And one thing I've noticed that my students have a hard time understanding is the idea of investing, of having your money grow, and that later on you can have more money. That's a very abstract concept, but Monopoly is a perfect game because you go around the board and you buy assets or property, and then you end up getting more money from that property. That
Hmm,
real life application will really help these students understand what investments are.
that's so true. I'm curious. I've seen games like stock portfolio games where people have to invest in the stock market. Do you think those types of games are worthwhile and educational to deaf youth?
I do see a lot of teachers using games like stock market games where you'll have students compete with one another to see who ends up with the most money after a certain amount of time, say 10 weeks or sometimes a year. And I understand their motivation behind offering that game for their students, yet I don't think it's a good idea to introduce students to that type of game
Oh no.
because ultimately, day trades, short term trading is what that's teaching. And when you invest your money, you really should be thinking about the longer term, say
Uh-huh,
5, 10, 15, even 30 years.
uh-huh, uh-huh.
If you want to do day trading, you might as well go to Las Vegas and play roulette. I don't think that that's building good investment habits to teach that to our youth. It is good to teach them how buying shares works, but I think you need a longer term to really solidify the concept.
Neat information, Michael. So I'm curious about our participants. Do you have any recommendations for extracurricular or outside of school activities for our students to become more financial literate? Okay, I do see two comments. One from Mike Kane, and the comment is another tough concept for youth today to understand is bank statements or checkbooks or just writing checks in general. Again, it was a critical skill back in our time, but nowadays with ATMs and online banking, students or youth use that instead of having a checkbook. So, again, banking itself has changed in comparison to what it was years back, and it's so true. I agree. Michael, what do you think of that?
Yes, I definitely agree. And you've been, once you've been studying,
There's been studies done on spending.
thank you, there's been studies done on spending. And once you have that money in your hand, it's harder for you to spend that money. Say you have cash in hand, as opposed to if you just have a card that you can just swipe. You're not feeling the loss of money as you're swiping your card. So it doesn't impact you as strongly as it does when you're using cash. So things are different now compared to a long time ago when people only paid with cash. It's important to teach students to still be responsible and that all of that swiping adds up at the end of the month and they need money left over to pay their bills.
Right. I think it's easy for kids now to feel disconnected from their money by the use of credit cards or plastic. Again, like I said, a Monopoly, there's a new version of Monopoly now that includes credit cards. So it's important to make sure
I
uh, what you're doing in the real world with your credit. And there are also online apps like Venmo or Cash App, which are really changing the game. Moving on now, it seems there's another comment. Actually, it's a question from a private attendee asking, have you heard about green light cards? They've been designed to help parents instruct their kids how to use credit or debit cards. I'm wondering if you all are familiar with that. It's new to me. Michael, I'm curious about you.
in terms of investing,
The individual said green light. It's a green light card. I haven't heard about it. I would like to learn more. If you have the information, please type that into the chat box and I will look that up later.
I do have some thoughts related to that question about encouraging young people to invest. Really, my second thought is that we cannot predict what the future holds. Stock markets go up and down. That's something that we can't foresee. However, one thing we can control is how much our investments cost ourselves a month in fees. So we should really devote our energy to make sure that we're managing things such as fees. That's the most important thing I really emphasize with my students is once you start in investments, look for zero fees or very low fee products. I'm a
Mhm.
big supporter of index funds.
Okay, okay.
I talk a lot about that instead of choosing individual stocks, choosing something that will spread your money across many different companies. And I emphasize to my students that when you're in high school, you have 30 or 40 years to see your money grow in the long term. And the earlier you start, the greater returns you'll see. So I use the concept of how your money should double every 10 years. And so if you double that starting amount 4 times, you'll be amazed to see how much money you'll have in 40 years if you start right now.
Mhm.
And yes, I do have a few recommendations for specific apps, which I'll discuss later on in the presentation.
Yes, and I see another comment from Mary Matchett. She has several suggestions for different roles students can take on for earning more money to understand the value and significance of it. For one is having a lemonade stand and selling lemonade. Another one is delivering the paper uh, or having a job. And it's important because now this generation seems to have a difference because not too many people are interested in the paper. We don't use a physical newspaper anymore. Most people get their news from Twitter, I believe, now at this point. What are your thoughts about what types of jobs are best for young people nowadays, Michael?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is my neighbor's daughter is in the Girl Scouts, and she always, sells me Girl Scout cookies. So that's another great way to learn about money. And that hands-on experience, I can't say enough, is so wonderful. It's very important for young students to learn.
So true. And I also think it's important to remember that it's harder for today's generation's teens to get jobs. Back in the 70s or 80s, there was fast food jobs available, store clerk jobs available. But with this generation, they prefer 18 and over. They want someone who's independent for safety reasons. So it can be challenging. Something I've learned is that it's important for schools to become involved in creating those opportunities for their students. So if your school offers no job opportunities and doesn't have anything available, you need to talk to the administrators there so that they can get together, brainstorm, and develop a program and help that technical education portion. Let's move on to
For
the next
sure.
question. Number 5, discussion question 5. So what can parents do at home to help high school students develop their financial literacy? I'm really curious, Michael. You said you have 3 kids, right? What's your
Mhm.
vision for their future? What are you going to do?
Well, with my own 3 kids, you're asking?
Well, in general, we can apply this generally.
How will I teach my kids the value of money? Yeah, that's something I think about often. Because right now, my 5-year-old daughter will approach me at the grocery store and ask me for $1 to buy candy. She thinks money just magically, poof, is just there.
Uh-huh.
And one thing I discuss with my wife, we talk about tying their allowances with household chores.
Uh-huh.
For example, if you help wash the dishes after dinner, then that's worth $1. You earn $1. Or if you make your bed every night or every morning, that's another $5.
Right.
That way you tie household tasks to a dollar amount. We talk about that, and I see more and more families doing that actually.
Yeah, it's something I've noticed. I think a lot of families seem afraid to have a conversation about money with their kids. I'm curious, what are your opinions on that?
Yeah, there's a study that was done by Wells Fargo actually back maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and they published the findings that people are truly uncomfortable talking about their financial situation with other people. About 45% of people do not like discussing finances with others.
Yikes. Okay.
And if you ask your parents how often they talk about money with their children, only 1/3 discuss finances, and that's on a once a week basis with their kids around the dinner table. That means 2/3 of families do not discuss the topic at all. That conversation, that dialogue is so important. Having parents walk their children through the household budget, talk about, earnings, how much needs to be spent on utilities or at the grocery store, and how they make those decisions. Let their children see the thinking process that the adults are going through. That is so helpful.
So true.
And it also can be a barrier for a lot of our students because many of our students have difficulty communicating with their families, especially if their families don't know sign language. So that's a double barrier. Parents who are not comfortable talking about money anyway, and then if you compile a language barrier on top of it. So one thing I do like to do with my students is ask them to go and have a sit down with their family, specifically talk with them about college,
Uh-huh.
how they will pay for college, whether they'll borrow money or use voc rehab, if they'll get uh, support from their parents. And when asking my students to do this, oftentimes my students say this is the very first time they've ever had a financial discussion with their family of any kind. So giving them a specific assignment that they have to go home and talk to their parents about finances is a good way to get the ball rolling in the right direction.
Yes, it is. And from my experience as a teacher and as a director of instruction, it's important to approach parents' expectations for their deaf and hard of hearing students. I notice sometimes parents with a deaf child, sometimes they're unsure and they just don't understand what might be in their child's future. So often we encourage those parents to think about that future and what type of employment they want to have with their child to have, and to have those conversations and help their children develop their plan and their vision for their own future. Now, I'm curious if there's any audience members, some of those who are parents themselves. What have you done at home to help your high school age students develop financial literacy? Or what discussions have you had with your parents? So if you have any thoughts on that, please go ahead and type them into the chat box at this moment. And it seems there's no, oh, there's a comment coming in now. Cynthia Sawyer, hi, let me wave hello. She says, what are some ideas for families who do not have financial literacy themselves? The majority of our students live below the poverty level, which is true. Do you have any resources or suggestions for them? Michael, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that truly is a challenge. And it's something in the past when I worked at Wells Fargo, that's something that we really thought a lot about was how to help people who live in poverty better manage their money and learn how to manage their money because so often they fall into the trap of paying payday loans, having a debit card with extraordinary fees that really deplete their funds. That's a huge challenge. That's one reason that they developed hands-on banking to help address that issue. So now, for our students and their families, what I could say is that it's a topic that can always be discussed anywhere. For example, if you go to the grocery store, talk about how you plan out your meals for the week, how you decide what you're going to buy based on your budget. That's something that every family can discuss with their child. And that's a good starting place. Again, in our classroom, we'll talk about things that may not come up at home.
Uh-huh.
And the challenge really is, I recognize the challenge that Americans face, but we do the best we can.
So true, Michael. Also, sometimes teachers out there can become supportive in those discussions. Like, for example, with that ABLE account. I've seen a situation where a teacher called in some parents and said, "Hey, I think your child might be able to benefit from this ABLE app and by having an ABLE account." And sometimes even the parents themselves would benefit from having that ABLE account. And so it's nice for educators to be able to bring the family together and show them and model how to have this financial conversation to parents, because then they can go ahead and take that and use it themselves. At our school, the Lauren Clare Center, uh, we do have a coordinator that works at the parent center, so that if in case we have families who have a serious need, we can provide those resources and share those with the family. So check to see if there's any support staff at your schools. It doesn't necessarily have to only be your child's teacher, but there are other folks there within the administration who are often able to provide support.
Yeah.
I think it's time that we move ahead with our next question. Okay, next discussion question is what topics should be taught in high school to best prepare students for college life? And I think that's an important question for me because as I work at the Lauren Clare Center, I also teach at Gallaudet quite often, and I see students who often fall into financial traps or have fallen into traps over the years. So, Mike, what are your thoughts on that?
As we all know, after high school, once you turn 18, you can finally sign for things on your own.
Mhm.
And I do remember my very first week of college when I got to new student orientation. The first thing I saw was a huge hall filled with tables that were represented by different banks, encouraging all of us new students to sign up for their credit cards. I can imagine what it feels like for an 18-year-old person, first time out on their own, thinking how awesome it is to get their first credit card and they want to go out and use it, swipe it
Yep.
to keep up with the Joneses. Buy new clothes, buy new electronics, laptop.
Always, always.
And that is a huge hole that they fall into right off the bat financially without even establishing an income.
Yeah.
So that is something I talk about with my students, that there are these pitfalls that they need to be aware of and need to avoid. And oftentimes I'll give my students a research assignment where they have to learn about a specific financial topic. They'll type it into Google and then they'll choose the very first result that they see, which also tends to be a sponsored ad or a sponsored result
Yes.
that's paid by that financial company that's trying to get them to sign up so that they can get your money, basically. So that's also something I have to explain to my students so that they're aware of that.
Yeah.
That actually reminds me of another story. When I went into college, a good friend of mine was offered a huge loan, like a 5-year loan. And upon receiving that loan, what my friend did was go and buy a Harley Davidson. Instead
Wow.
of using that money for college, which was the intended purpose of the loan, I thought, why would you go out and buy a motorcycle first thing? But unfortunately, he didn't continue on in school. And a loan is something that you cannot discharge in bankruptcy. So you have to be very careful about the types of loans that you take out.
Very true.
Also, overall, it's good to have some wisdom about habits, and like I said, these habits are established early in life. Once they're established, it's very hard to change these habits, whether they're good or bad. One thing I see often in young college students who are deaf, many who receive SSI, and
Okay.
SSI is a great way to supplement and to make ends meet while you're attending school, but SSI has its own rules where if you have money over a certain amount in your bank account, let's say it's $2,000, they will then cut your next month's check. And I've seen a lot of young people set with their mindset that they have to spend their money, they have to drain their bank account every month. That's really not a good habit to teach students starting off in life, that then they translate that to work and they spend all their money. That's where having an ABLE account is truly beneficial. There's really not a lot of awareness about ABLE accounts, but that is an account that once you put your money in, it will not count against your asset limit for your Social Security benefits. So that's a good way for students to start building and saving money. I really encourage young habits in high school so that those habits will stay with them for life. It's so important.
It really is, Michael. I often think about deaf youth, and when they finally make it to college, for the first time, they're completely independent. And so, even if you've gone to a deaf school or were mainstreamed, you know, all day was directed. You got up in the morning, went to the cafeteria, went to class, participated in activities, and then maybe did something after school. So having to train and develop that internal structure to maintain structure while you're independent, that's critical. Wow. And like you said, that college environment, I've noticed all colleges seem to be surrounded by stores and are full of businesses that are thirsting for their students' money. And they look forward to the
Mhm.
economics that come out of those schools. And so at the same time, we want them to be aware of that. I mean, this is very powerful information. I think we have a couple comments that have populated in our Q&A box. Let me look through them really quick. Right, I see what first person says. It is important to teach students starting early to look for sponsors and scholarships, to do well academically, and to reduce their costs for uh, that higher education. And true, it's tough to have enough, and there are scholarships available for deaf and hard of hearing students, which is true. I did want to comment about that because I think there are many college students who are deaf students who go ahead and sign up for vocational rehabilitation services. And I think it's important for students to understand that VR is kind of like having a job, voc rehab. Voc rehab is like having a job. And so you have to turn in your grades, you have to do your best work for them to be able to pay for your education and the other services that they provide. So if I don't do my job, then the thing that happens is I don't get paid. And so that financial support is gone. What are your thoughts about that, Michael?
Yeah, definitely. Voc Rehab is a wonderful tool, a very important tool for our students, and it really will help them pay their way through school, whether it's schooling or training that they need to help meet their goals. And it really is a boon for our deaf community. Really value that program, and we're thankful for it. Right now, we're under a lot of financial pressure. Rehab used to be something that we all took for granted. Everyone got it no matter what back in the days. But now you have to show your grades and your test scores in high school. Now there's a lot more monitoring that happens if you're using their money to go to college. And you're right, it's just like a job, teaching you the value of money. Money is not free. You can't just go to college and have fun and do whatever you want. You have to take it seriously and really value the resources that you're receiving.
Yeah, you sure do. Second comment from an anonymous attendee asking Michael, what financial topics do you tend to teach and at what grade? Do you teach banking to freshmen and investing to seniors, or what are your suggestions? Good question, by the way.
Yeah, good question. At NM at MSSD, financial literacy is a mixture and it's for all ages, all grades. That's actually a challenge for me because I learned from my time working in the banking industry that financial education works best if it's right before you're going to apply that knowledge. So, for example, if you're planning to go buy a house, it's best to take a class related to purchasing a house right before you start. Because
Okay.
if you take it too far in advance, let's say as a freshman, we teach freshmen how to learn about loans. It's a long time before they're going to use that knowledge. It's not valuable to them. So it's important to touch on big topics for them, like budgeting, how to save money, and how to invest, because no matter how old you are, you can always relate to budgeting.
Right. And I think applying that is so critical. If students have the chance to apply what they learned, it'll stick. When you don't get to apply that, it just kind of dwindles away, right? Especially with high school students. Okay, I'm curious. Any more questions from our audience member? I do. I see three more. One person asked, uh, with VR support declining, what are your suggestions for students to be able to find further support? If VR were to, let's say, disappear, what would you recommend?
Let's hope we never see that world where VR is gone. That would really make things hard for our students to achieve and find employment to support themselves.
I agree fully.
In general, I think that politicians are in support of voc rehab. They believe that it is best to spend their money to train students to go and get jobs to become taxpayers instead of having students that are just on uh, supplemental income. So they're in support of the program. That therefore, I feel that it would never disappear. However, it's important to teach students to look for scholarships, apply for scholarships, or how to even find a work study program where they can work on campus and use that money to pay their bills. Something that's important to start thinking about is whether college is, in fact, the best fit for each of our students. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Often, or sometimes it's important for students to realize that their best path is to find a trade and to go on and learn a trade.
Right. I think we have some more questions in our Q&A box, but because of time reasons, we've got to continue and move ahead. Michael, we're just starting to talk about this and about voc rehab and scholarships. There are a lot of high schools now that help with applications where students could enter their goals, maybe as they begin their freshman year, their interest and topics. They can start finding out which scholarships are a fit for their interest. And so there are programs out there within the community for that, but we do have to keep pushing forward and move forward on this because of time. We're at our last discussion question for tonight, discussion question number 7. And so we've been talking about college students and now talking about employment. How can teachers, parents, and counselors help high school students prepare for work and the economy? Uh, we've had a webinar where we included Mark Apodaca, and we had students who approached him after they graduated, and they approached him with his W-2 and asked him what it was. And so there's still a lot of financial education out there that needs to be done for our students. What do you think about that, Michael?
Yeah, that's one thing we cover in our financial education class is how to fill out your tax forms, your W-2, your 1040 form.
Okay.
That's an important skill to have.
Michael, how do you teach students to be prepared for the work world? What's an example of what you have in your course?
Well, one thing we talk about is benefits. As you join a job, a full-time job, you'll be offered a package, a benefits package where you will have to start thinking about retirement. And I want to go back to my point that I made before about college or employment. I think that's where we have a huge responsibility to help our students broaden their thinking.
Uh-huh.
One thing I see a lot of is that we tend to push college all the way. We tell all our students that they're going to college, college or bust.
We do.
And that really is the wrong message to be sending our kids. So I asked my students to do a final project where they have to get up and give a presentation about what they plan to do after high school, whether that be college or to go on to work, what type of work they'll look for, their income, the cost of living in the town that they plan to live in.
Uh-huh.
And over the last 2 years, I've had 50 students. I've only had one who said that they wanted to go on directly to learn a trade and go to work. All the rest said college, when really that was not a realistic goal for some of those students. So we really have to encourage them to think about other options.
Yeah, yeah, we do. And I'm so sorry to interrupt, but our webinar is going to wrap up soon. Do you have any final comments in regards to this topic, Michael, to prepare students for work or employment? Any last comments, Michael?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Yeah, I'm sorry you missed that. I'm just wondering if you have any last comments before we go ahead and wrap up for tonight.
Yeah, again, there's no right or wrong answer when it comes to financial education. It's about first meeting your needs, and then you can satisfy your wants afterwards. That's something we need to really keep in the minds of our students, how to identify the difference between wants and needs. Once they have that skill, they can go on to develop good financial management skills.
Michael, thank you so much. At this point at 7:58, we have 2 minutes left for tonight's webinar, and we do want to share our resources and information with you. Right after this webinar, you will be getting a copy of our PowerPoint for tonight. And that PowerPoint towards the end includes some different instructional resources. Michael, can you cover what those resources are really quickly?
Sure. The first app that we recommend is called Mint.
Okay.
It's an app where you can put all of your accounts that you have compiled into one nice snapshot. It's a nice way to track everything.
Neat.
The second one is called Acorns, and it's a robo investment app where you will set up a fixed amount. It can be as little as $5 a month, and that will start to be put into equities. And it's free. It's a free app for young people. If you're a student, a full-time student. And so those are the two apps that I really recommend. I recommend you go check those out. There's also some resources that I mentioned earlier. When there's a question asked about which videos I show my students that are in sign language, those two YouTube links are listed here.
Right.
And if you have time, look through the other resources as well. See how you can bring this material into your classroom or the schools in which you work.
Nice, Michael. Also, it's nice to share these resources with parents. There are parents that are new signers, and it's nice for them to sit with their children and both learn, the child learn about financial education and the parents learn more about signs. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Michael. We're
Thank
going to have
you.
to wrap up. We'll be on again next month, February 28th for our next, February 18th for our next webinar, which is credit and debit. Challenges for deaf people and options for moving forward. Again, you can reach me direct through my email direct, which is showing on the screen there. And I'd like to thank everyone for being here with us tonight. Thank you for your time. Agreed, Michael?
Yes, thank you for having me here. I really enjoyed it. Thanks again.
Hope you all have a fantastic night, and we'll see you next time.